Good morning, sir and madam. Today we are going to speak about Vasyl Sukhomlynsky, Ukrainian, a very famous Ukrainian and Soviet pedagogue. And what he thought about psychology and education together, and how does it work, let's say, within students' networks. Well, modern, humanistic dominant in education determines the axiological nature of pedagogy and forms its fundamental direction. Pedagogical anthropology, which is based on understanding of the nature of the human being and the nature of education. Anthropological approach, constituting one of the main axioms of education since its inception, appears in the works of many teachers of the past, as Mykolai Pyrgo, Sukhomlynsky, Janusz Korczak, and so on. But only Vasyl Sukhomlynsky raised it to the level of the main goal of education. In writings and experience of Vasyl Sukhomlynsky, a careful researcher can discover traces of the anthropological approach. Sukhomlynsky devoted his life to transforming school into moral sanatorium, as presented once by Janusz Korczak, or rather creative laboratory of harmonious spiritual and social development of students' personality. Vasyl Sukhomlynsky focuses his interest on students' personality and their psychological and educational characteristics since he became a principal of the public school. The resolution of the Pedagogical Council of 1952 states that having listened to Vasyl Sukhomlynsky's speech on students' educational characteristics, the Pedagogical Council decides to oblige all class teachers by the end of the school year to sum up students' educational characteristics of their grades with respect to state of health, home conditions, manner of preparing homework, memory capacity, behavioral habits, skills, and abilities, and outline specific ways to increase students' performance in school. So he was very influential when he worked in the school, right? Also, I can't but mention that Vasyl Sukhomlynsky to mid-1950s was an ardent supporter of school of thought, with its focus on solid base of knowledge and skills and mental work of students. This was reflected in educators' use in pedagogical content. Proposed scheme considered a student as a subject of learning activities. In other words, covers primarily students' intellectual and volitional traits as skills, abilities, and endowments, perceiving the student as an individual. Status, values, motives, and finally students' character are evaluated in relation to how they study. In 1953, Vasyl Sukhomlynsky published the article entitled Students' Educational Characteristics, where he explained his views on meaning and purpose of characteristics. He said, individual features depend primarily on the way a student understands and perceives learning material, and at each stage of learning process, a teacher should realize how a student performs, how he remembers and learns rules. This student's characteristic of absorption, learning material and acquisition of practical skills, we believe, ought to constitute the content of educational characteristic. In our opinion, the latter should also include students' memory capacity, their work in the classroom and at home. However, Sukhomlynsky warns against categorical conclusions, stressing that students' individual characteristics are not something constant and invariable. If they change, and therefore students' educational characteristics change as well. Quotation, it must outline students' future prospects of development. Taking in account students' educational characteristics, a teacher, first of all, should be guided by the fact how a pupil develops his talents and what else a pedagogue should do to enhance students' understanding of the lesson. Well, Vasyl Sukhomlynsky notes, while most teachers prepare a lesson, they take into account following students' educational characteristics. Every student can perform well if the teacher correctly identifies their skills and develop positive qualities, whereas negative ones eliminate. The teacher notes down into students' diary daily observations of how student prepares for lessons, works in the classroom, and memorizes learning material. Public school staff under the direction of Vasyl Sukhomlynsky begins to discuss students' educational characteristics at meetings of teachers who teach in the class, and some characteristics are talked over at pedagogical council meetings. This staff brainstorming, according to Vasyl Sukhomlynsky, prompted teachers to examine students deeper and more comprehensively and help to reach a consensus about what should be studied in students' individual characteristics. In public school, in the early 1950s, was developed a comprehensive methodology was developed for compiling educational characteristics. Data for it was collected from school daily life. How a student learned program material in the classroom, how their practical skills and worldview were formed. Teachers studied not only students' responses but also their questions, which they asked during lessons. The results of these observations were recorded in teacher's diary, and at the end of the school year were analyzed by comparing what was typical for a student in the beginning and middle of the school year to that was recorded the last days of the academic year. The students' work at home was also taken into account, and after discussion on characteristics of certain class, teacher finally edited its list, and some of them were analyzed at the beginnings of pedagogical council. According to Vasyl Sukhomlynsky, the main task of a characteristic is to be a tool for increasing further students' performance at school. So naturally, educational characteristics drawn by power school teachers in the first half of the 1950s include certain rationalism, which reveals how teachers strove to increase people's cognitive development. And the analysis of 50 educational characteristics of graduates in 1954 led us to following conclusions. That the coincidence of the same characteristics among different students is very high. From 50 characteristics, the quality attentive was mentioned 28 times, persistent in overcoming learning difficulties, and diligent in doing homework 25. Language skills were mentioned 43 times, good memory capacity 37 times, 7 times, active participation 23 times, studiousness 27 times, etc. As can be seen, among students' characteristics given by the teacher, a central position occupies such ones as cognitive processes, attitudes to learning, evaluation of learning activities, and child's willpower. This fact confirms our conclusion that teachers primarily perceive a student as a study subject, not as an individual, and Vasyl Sukhomlynsky admitted by himself that at the beginning it was very difficult to prepare a child's educational characteristics, end of the quote, but he was firmly convinced, saying, quote, "The work of every teacher, director, and head teacher on educational characteristics of a child forms fundamental principles of teaching culture. When we know little about a child, there is no school, no education, no real teacher, and teaching staff." Over time, Vasyl Sukhomlynsky started to study scientifically a student and their educational characteristics. It was constant, thoughtful work of each teacher on child's educational characteristics with their complex spiritual world, joys and sorrows. Thus, students' educational characteristics are based on psychological analysis, observation, and learning. And in 1965, for the first time ever in Ukrainian secondary school, on the initiative of Vasyl Sukhomlynsky, the first psychological seminar was organized for teachers of power school. Its purpose was, by Vasyl's definition, to study men. This effectiveness of a psychological seminar as a form of learning students' personality was impressive. Enhanced psychological knowledge of teachers not only contributed to deeper understanding of their students, but also led to a drastic renewal of students' characteristics. And it was seen not only formally in changing characteristics named from educational to psychological and educational, but above all, the content of the word characteristic was changed as well. And thus, among students' characteristics made by teachers of power school in the second half of the 60s, the first prize was given to health, child's physical development, their overall development, individual cognitive development, how a child perceives objects and physical facts, how they form concepts, what language they use, how children memorize things, which thinking figurative abstract is more developed, what emotional coloring have their speech, what is students' level of emotional culture. So the teacher describing students' environment and conditions in which their intelligence is formed stops on positive and negative aspects that affect child's perception, ideas, language, and outlook. The huge attention of teachers is paid to intellectual life of the family. Vasyl Sukhomlynsky focuses on an extremely important aspect of educational characteristics as perspectivity. Quotation. We want to analyze not only what we see, but also express our thoughts, intentions, plans of an active educational impact on students' personality, tell about how this impact is made now and what difficulties we encounter in such educational work. We not only see a human as it is, but also design development of their intelligence, morality, aesthetic, and emotional culture. Students' characteristics were based on principles reports and discussed during psychological seminars. So we analyzed 47 reports of psychological seminars, which are kept in the Pedagogical Museum of Vasyl Sukhomlynsky in Kiev. To sum up, Analyzed characteristics in the first half of 50s and late 60s led us to the conclusion that Vasyl Sukhomlynsky views on psychological and educational characteristics evolved in parallel to development of scholars teaching philosophy. It shows how characteristics drawn by teachers from public school have changed during the period, and in the beginning the teachers emphasized the importance of students' positive school performance and related intellectual qualities, but then they started to penetrate into the essence of students' mental processes, analyze thoughtfully and determine causes of complex and sometimes contradictory manifestations of students' personality. Thank you so much for the attention. Please subscribe. See you later.